I have, maybe I could formulate others. I could only formulate one question was like, which is not, I mean, I guess it's an important one. It certainly doesn't encapsulate this section. It's like, what's the difference between axiomatics and codes? And he talked a lot about, or they talked a lot about why capitalism is axiomatic and not coded, but I just don't understand what the difference between those two is. Other than that, I feel like I understood parts of it, and as usual, I didn't understand parts. And I just feel like I don't understand Marx well enough to understand some of what, really the import of what they're saying. So I'm kind of like Hunter. I don't really have, any insights or any really potent questions, to direct at the text, just other than that one. So anyway, if anybody else has something more substantive, I'd be happy to hear it.
I think that's one of the key distinctions in this chapter, right? Coding versus axiomatic production. And I can't pretend like I grasp what they're saying, but I think I might have a glimmer. It seems to me like coding is very direct. I think it's right. I think it's clear that coding isn't production, but it guides production. And I want to say there's something almost not quite one-to-one with the coding, but it seems very direct, like all the previous examples with the territorial machine, right? You get the writing on your body, and it is direct, like that is who you are, that is what you are. And then with the despotic machine, the coding is very direct, like, go to the front lines and fight and take the city and storm their wall. That's your job, soldier man. There's not much latitude, whereas it seems to me like axiomatic is like a body of rules or rough rules, not a direct. Like if we think of like the Knight's Code, right? It's like when this happens, you must do this. It is very prescriptive, whereas axiomatic is like, make sure that if you start a business, it's profitable within a few years. But whatever business that is, it's up to you. How do you make it profitable? It's up to you. There's so it seems to me like the axiomatic aspect of the capitalist representation is laying down rules, but not in a strict guidance kind of way, but more of a like rules for running a business, right? And there's a whole lot of directions you can take it, but there are certain lines you can't cross. Is that fair, Chase?
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. So yeah, I think so. One way to think of axioms so I gave that kind of I was up to like 3 a.m, right? In that example thing for you, Nevit, all for you. But I said
no pressure.
Yeah, I
no
said
pressure,
that
Nevit.
there's some axioms that it was kind of like, they're basic statements and rules to follow. Although I think some of them weren't technically axioms, but more kind of like indirect effects of axioms, where I was saying it was something like, okay, yeah, make a profit if you're a business, you need a wage if you're just a worker. You need to earn your wage. Don't get fired. Otherwise you'll die, possibly, by more than likely. Various rules like this, okay? Or if you're a consumer, don't spend all your money. You gotta save some of it, but you don't want to save all of it. You gotta enjoy yourself, but not enjoy yourself too much, something like that. I think though that's more kind of what I'm describing is kind of subject formation as a result of not only the axioms, but the whole kind of total effect of the social field under the capitalist machine, or whatever you want to call it. And then the axioms, I think, so the role of the state in the capitalist society with the axioms, I think, is pretty key. So a lot of what they mean by axioms, I think, are going to be things that the state does in order to make sure that capitalism's deterritorialization, that whole thing, doesn't get too out of hand, that it can keep reproducing itself and expanding itself, but not so much that it goes outside of its continued reproduction of itself, which I think that's really the key thing about capitalism, is its ability to reproduce its kind of abstract form, as essentially it's kind of a, get surplus value, extract surplus value, or change things, put things into a flux, change things, but simultaneously do that so that you increase yourself and you reproduce yourself as this abstract model of, the elements are like equivalency, general equivalency of money, abstract labor that can be calculated and put into equivalency with abstract money. I think all that is involved, but so the axioms are going to be things like regulations. They're going to be financial regulations, all that kind of stuff. So I think this is it's really emphasizing the re-territorialization aspect that kind of reigns in the decoding.
Well, let me ask you a quick question. When you were given those examples, when you first started talking, like about what the laborer should do and what the boss should do and that kind of stuff, were those axioms or were those codes?
Oh, so I think it'd probably be better to say they're axioms, I would say. Okay, so the codes, those have to do with, okay, so you've got your flows going here, which, they're just kind of these material flows in a very wide sense of the term. And the codes are what selects and distributes those. So we've got flows of, grain or people or something. The code says, you can go here, you can't go there. You go here, you're marked for that, do this, do that, don't do that, do this. And so I think of it as kind of, it's more like a subtractive kind of thing, where the axioms are more, I guess they're regulatory in a sense, so they're also kind of limiting. They're kind of like squeezing things down a little bit, but not too much. But yes, I think they're more, so something like, I need to make a profit, or I need money so I can eat, these kind of things. I think it'd be easier to say that those have to do with axioms. Although I think really it's something kind of in between, to be like technical about it. It's kind of something, it's not necessarily a code or an axiom, I think, in the most technical sense. Yeah.
I've actually got I want to see if my understanding kind of gels with, I've got this cat also stepping on my fucking headphone wire. Okay. So just to see if I've got like a basic sense, I kind of want to, so as far as I get it, like codes seem, and this is just, I feel like I'm just playing this game of like I'm in an intro ethics class or something, and I'm just talking about like, dude, it just kind of seems this way. And that's really interesting, but like, like I'm just being super, like that's just my opinion. So like, in my like opinion, it seems that codes, like you guys said, like Erica Chase, you guys said, they're more direct, and something like codes seem to me to apply to like the necessary or seemingly necessary organization of a flow, like how money, how currency works in a capitalist economy or whatever. It still follows some sort of code in a sense. Or like grains when you plant a seed and now the cat wants out. You plant a seed in the ground and it follows this sort of biological or bioorganic code in this relation to a series of productive flows. You know what I mean? Like a seed of a tree, or like I'm just saying biological mechanisms, you know, like material operations seem to follow codes. But in the case of something like an axiom, right? An axiom is a and I did to quote you, Chase, directly, basic statements and rules to follow, which make them a little looser, a little bit more visible in the space of semiotics or of like symbolic kind of outlaying of like these sort of just these statements, rather than these sort of baked in sequences or you know, structures of things. The axiomatic is not the structure of the thing. It's like it's a thing that was laid out after, you know, to say, okay, now how can we respond to these flows that we're seeing, you know? Yeah, like how an axiom works in mathematics once it's discovered, once it's like, you know, or I don't know if it's discovered or created. That's a different conversation. But like once it's pointed at, you know, or you're pointed out. So, and the axioms that I see, the things that I see as axiomatic about capital are like you said, Jay, make a profit, earn a wage, don't waste all your money, don't spend all your money, but spend a little bit of your money. Be, you know, an effective consumer, but which, you know, means whatever. Hustle. You be a self-made entrepreneur, be a personal entrepreneur. You know, these sort of like these axiomatic injunctions almost, right? And the advantage that axioms have, which I think is a big thing that they're trying to get across in the chapter, and this is in response to Nevitt's original question, is like what's with the focus on the split between codes and axioms, is that so codes are these structures of things. Like codes are present almost in a, I don't even know if I hazard the term, like an ontological sort of analysis of things. It's like there's this code of flows that we can see, this code that flows are beholden to sometimes. But axioms are, like I said, this looser, you know, more social thing, these more basic statements and rules to follow. And because they're a little bit more zoomed out, a little bit more basic, a little bit more just these sort of statements to follow, it gives it this capacity to infinitely reproduce. And they talk about genetic code, like, because codes face a lot of problems. Codes face deterritorialization, codes face decoding, codes face overcoding and recoding. And as codes are reproduced through time, there's a potentiality, at least in the case of like genetic coding and things like that, for codes to mutate or become different. You know, like they can't infinitely reproduce with that certainty as a code. Codes are vulnerable to a lot of stuff. But axioms, given that it's a little bit more flexible, it's like codes are a rigid boundary box, where an axiom is more elastic, a little bit more rubbery, a little bit more flexible. And as a result of being more flexible, it is thus more resilient. The tree that bends doesn't break. I think the axiom is a little bit more like, look, just make a profit. You know, whatever MCM, whatever you want to be as your commodity, whatever commodity you want, you know, sugar, human bodies, you know, whatever, liquor, drugs, it does not matter. Just make a profit, any kind, whatever, right? And that's not to say this goes here and you know, you gotta put this in this box and then close it, then clap 3 times and then spit, you know, whatever. But yeah, that's, I don't know, that's what I get, is that axioms have some sort of, and I think they're trying to get into that with this guy. The way to talk about axioms in an effective way is through this guy named Hjelmslev, who I don't really know anything about. But that's what I feel, is this flexible flow style of linguistics or whatever, this flow, this linguistics of flows that axioms are kind of able to be talked about through, I think. But that's it.
So then, like Hunter said, there are flows in capitalism. And so at the end of this chapter, he starts talking about reterritorialization. And so would that be, so does capitalism, when it sets up these axioms, would then a particular capitalist society, so I'm wondering if maybe are axioms shared among different forms of different capitalist societies, but then maybe the way they reterritorialize maybe depends upon conditions on the ground or something. But anyway, my main question was, since there are flows in capitalism, or maybe I'm wrong, but I assume that Hunter's right about that, does that mean that is part of this reterritorialization process where capitalism initially deterritorializes, breaks all the codes apart, shuffles them, and then reassembles them into other flows, and then that's the reterritorialization? Is that correct?
Yeah, I think so. So all these societies have flows. That's going to be kind of the, they talk about a generalized theory of flows. So I think that is kind of what they're operating with. It's all flows, just how the flows are dealt with. That's kind of what defines the differences between these different social formations, where it's, okay, primitive territorial, that's all about the coding of the flows. Despotic imperial, overcoding. And then capitalist, it's going to be decoding, but that decoding, it's going to have that really distinctive dual movement of, the deterritorialization, but for capitalism to work, that deterritorialization always has to be coupled with a reterritorialization, which maybe that sounds kind of like abstract word salad for a little bit, but I think that's really kind of like one of the key points in their analysis of capitalism. And also it's very interesting. I think it's a great insight personally into the nature of capitalism, how it has something that is kind of, it brings some kind of novelty into social existence. It kind of can rip these old codes, out of the ground and release these flows that are no longer coded. It's like what Marx is talking about in, I think it's Marx and Engels, I think it's in the Communist Manifesto, where they say, all that is solid melts into air. It's something like that, right? Which I wonder, okay, first of all, I think they got the element wrong. First of all, solids do not melt into air. They melt into liquid, and liquid gives you flows. So, yeah. But I think that's what they're on about with that deterritorialization and the decoding. And then, but you see, if it were just the decoding, just the deterritorialization, that at its absolute limit, that is what schizophrenia is. Schizophrenia is the deterritorialization without the reterritorialization. Where, capitalism, you got to have both. You got to have both. And I think it's the axioms that help make sure that that's coupled together. Otherwise you'll get, these runaway mutant flows, which I think that's the thing, is this is what the state is always kind of fighting. It's always fighting, whatever, things will be unleashed because there's no way to kind of predict these things, which is why axioms need to be, like Hunter said, flexible. They need to be, I think codes are much more really strict, and they deal with specific things. You know, they deal with qualities, where axioms, they're going to deal with quantities, abstract numbers, and that's going to give them ability to have this kind of really generalized kind of way of dealing with things without actually, don't care what they are. You know, is it fit into this number, this unit? Fine, whatever. And so I think that's one of the, so I was actually reading this in it's actually kind of like a commentary on A Thousand Plateaus, but that's what they're saying about axioms, was that they deal with non-specific flows, the decoded flows that don't have any kind of a quality kind of selected from them, because that's what the primitive territorial codes, they're all about being able to take some kind of a quality, not an abstract quantity, and select those, or, you know, allow that to pass, not that one. That's going to be the coding. But the decoded flows, you're entering this like abstract world where you've got just these numbers. Just think of it like what's kind of like the thing at the very beginning, talking about Marshall McLuhan, just the electronic flow, or the electric light as the medium is the message right there. I think the way that it can have no content to it, it can just be this kind of just pure information that it is itself, just the flow of what it is. It doesn't need any kind of a meaning to it. I think that is kind of, okay, now we're dealing with something that is kind of like, it's abstracted, it's mathematical, and it's quantitative enough where we can really do something with that. And I think that's what the axioms do. And that's also what the decoding that's really specific to capitalism, what it does. So, okay, one thing about this, reading this is, so a lot of this reminded me of Nick Land, who is all about, okay, there's this kind of, capitalism brings this kind of just this, you know, this decoding, deterritorialization, you know, it brings forth this kind of destruction of the old world and something, for the most part, seemingly novel in some way, that kind of flux in an abstract sense. So I think Nick Land is really good at taking that kind of terrifying and uncanny aspect of it and giving it this a kind of, I don't know, almost like a, it's kind of like, I don't know if anyone can relate to this, but it's kind of like thinking about your own disintegration of your ego or something like that, and feeling just like an ecstasy about that. There's this kind of ecstatic quality to something like that. I don't know how else to describe it, but I think Bataille was probably getting at something like that. And I think that's the quality that Nick Land is good at, but he kind of glorifies it, where if you really like reading, or I think if you really read this, that you don't even need to read carefully to know that Deleuze and Guattari have a more nuanced kind of understanding, where they're able to see, okay, yeah, there's part of capitalism has these liberatory, revolutionary potentials that it unleashes just by having all these apps. Everything's turned into money, everything is turned into quantities. All of our human relations and social relations are determined by, you know, roles of quantity and money and blah blah blah. You know, capitalism, we all live it, I don't have to explain it. But that's going to do a lot of interesting stuff socially, But the thing is, we don't need to accelerate kind of all of that necessarily, all of it. Instead, the idea is to kind of take key parts of that are not recoded back in, and instead accelerate those that are not kind of recaptured by the state reterritorialization and all that. So yeah, that's my take on that. I don't even remember what was even like the original question. Does it even matter? I don't know. Capitalism. I mean, we're all fucked anyways, right? Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I just want to so like, yeah, I think I just want to respond to something that Nevitt said just a little bit ago. Like, you know, and to kind of keep, I don't know, maybe not continuing. What I'm going to provide isn't a continuation at all, but more of like a stop or a break flow, but in the stream of consciousness or thought going on, but or the line of thinking. But thing that Nevitt said just a second ago in the chat was about whether or not schizophrenia, in a sense, is this I guess why it's the edge, why it's the limit for capital, this broad decoding without recoding. Yeah, I think and it was kind of like a couple people were in the chat were just talking about it, like, you know, what is schizophrenia? I saw in the chat, is schizophrenia sort of like an in-between, you know, this kind of transitional almost, you know, to this reterritorialization. And here's just what I think is going on. And what I think is going on is that when it says things like and I know the part of the reading, like around 259 or 60 or something, or maybe whatever, where they're talking about this this deterritorialization and reterritorialization. I'll find the exact page. Why not? So it was page, I think, yes, 257 actually. Yes. So on 257, they're talking about this question of deterritorialization and reterritorialization that I thought was really key. And the way they kick it off is by saying people often desire, or how can we, I mean, it's kind of bleeding in from their previous conversation on class consciousness. They make this point that says, okay, there's a difference between a class and a group. There's a difference. There's just a difference between a class of people and a group of people, and a class's interests and a group of people's interests, you know? What I got from that is that class consciousness and class interests, you know, at least in the forms of what we were talking about when we bring out Lenin and the Russian Revolution, forging that class consciousness and this bipolarity of classes, class consciousness and class interest to me seems to be somewhat kind of connected to this world of representation, right? This sort of less spontaneous realm, and to further this distinction between like class and group and interest and desire, whatever, they on 257 they start that paragraph, desire can never be deceived. They say people often desire against their own interests. I think that's like a part of what they're trying to get at, is like people often desire something that's not exactly within their own best interests or whatever, right? Yeah, pre-conscious class desire and unconscious group desires. Exactly. Thank you, Joey. It's precisely what I'm talking about. So in this paragraph, you know, when one desires against one's own interests, they talk about this. In fact, it's actually in the middle of that paragraph in the page. It says, what they deterritorialize with one hand, they reterritorialize with the other. These neo-territorialities are often artificial, residual, and archaic. So they give a few examples, but like, okay, and just to kind of clarify on a thing that Nevitt was asking, you know, like, how does it reterritorialize? Is the reterritorializing in some way affected by like codes or whatever? And do they all follow the same axiom? I think here's my answer. Or to my, this is what I think. I don't know. Still, but I think that capitalism and the capitalist flow, or the capitalist mode and social organization, right, performs this process, or under capitalism there is this, or within, or on the body of, I'm really trying to find the right word, but like on the body of capital as the full social body, when we live in a capitalist world, right? I think that there is this overarching axiom, and that we talk about, it's kind of flexible, but we're all kind of within its bounds. It's a little bit flexible, it's a little bit of wiggle room, but we're all kind of squared off within it, right? And the room for play comes in, especially present in the reterritorializing act of the state, of the capitalist state apparatus, the capitalist state. Okay, so like, so for example, there was a need for reterritorializing in certain, let's say, okay, I'll give you an example, like Indonesia. A lot of people don't talk about Indonesia very much, but like I think Indonesia is a very good example of this phenomenon, of this reterritorializing. So, okay, to explain, Indonesia in the 1960s was facing a good degree of political unrest. There was a gentleman named Suharto. There was a communist party that was had a few members. There's a few youth groups organizing against those communists, et cetera. So there was a certain cultural force at hand, already kind of present in Indonesian culture. It wasn't the same as, let's say, Nazi Germany. Nazi Germany experienced a great degree of political turmoil, and then things exploded, right? People were perplexed and seeking answers, and then an answer was provided, right, in this radical conservative revolution of fascism, this reterritorializing through saying, we're going to revolutionize the means of production, but we're going to maintain traditional property relations. So we're going to reterritorialize aggressively. We're gonna revolutionize like our infrastructure and our heavy industry and our luxury consumer goods, but we're going to maintain and in fact kind of reify some sort of foundational or fundamentalist or kind of conservative social forms and property relations, right? It's the same sort of thing. It was a similar situation, but that same answer was not given in Indonesia, right? So there was a code going on in Nazi Germany, or in pre-Nazi Germany, before Nazism rose at all. There was a code, there was a set of codes, a multiplicity of codes flowing in and out of a state, a capitalist state, full of these citizens and wage laborers who were feeling the effects of these codes that told them things like, your bank is closing and you don't have any money anymore, and I don't know what that means, sorry, and your job is just gone, I don't know. And so people scrambled for answers, right? There were these codes that determine things, and one of those codes was, your nation participated in World War I in a way that demands retribution. Okay, so there were certain historical kind of forces at play. Indonesia, however, 20, 30 years later, right, in the 1960s, the answer was completely different. The answer was not to go for this fascist, I mean, it was still fascist, but it wasn't to go for the traditional sort of Western fascist answer of social order and discipline, and like, we need to do this for the fatherland, and we need to tighten our belts and reterritorialize, let's do it, right? Indonesia had a much, or at least the Indonesian conservative and fascist movement had a much more dangerous answer, I think, weirdly, even though I mean, it resulted in, I guess, quantitatively less death and suffering, perhaps, at least in the moment. This is all just arguable, but their answer was a group called the Pancasila. The Indonesian answer was a group called the Pancasila, which is a group of militant gang members and individual citizens willing to commit crimes extra legally, extrajudicially, outside of the government, not a member of any sort of government apparatus or beholden to any sort of international court or operating as representatives of the Indonesian government. It was just a group of gang members who would go around beating people up and killing ethnic Chinese people and labeling people as communists and cutting their heads off. Yes, like brown shirts. These vigilantes or just gang members who were totally outside the law and able to just terrorize citizens, right? And these individuals terrorizing citizens were part of the, and brown shirts were were like a key element in the rise of the fascist wave in Europe. But I think the Pancasila and the Pancasila youth were a huge monument, like the breakthrough watershed moment for the fascist movement in Indonesia, right? I mean, they focus on freedom. Where do we get our term for gangster? You know, and in the Indonesian, it's derived from the same word as freedom. And they focus on freedom, this radical, terrifying freedom. And why do they think that? At least as part of a bit of research that I've done, is that at the time in the culture, American Western cinema and noir films were extremely popular in Indonesia. And not only that, but gang members in Indonesia would scalp tickets to movies outside of movie theaters to see like Western, like gangster movies, would scalp tickets to make money, and then would go watch the movie with the tickets they couldn't sell. And we're very impressionable young Indonesian teens and stuff. And we'd be like, I want to be like that, you know? So there's this wave of a totally different cultural affect and force going into this place. And as a result, a totally different form of reterritorialization kind of comes to the head, right? You know, different places at different times. And of course, there are similarities, like Eric is pointing out, there are very distinct similarities, but the form and fashion of this reterritorializing move that the capitalist state apparatus enacts, there are big distinctions. And I think those big distinctions, like you pointed out, Nevitt, I think this is true. I think this is right, that those distinctions are able to be traced to these different present codes that are affecting the social order, like the historical or social or geographic conditions of the community. You know what I mean? Those are the codes, but the axiom is the same. It's just, you need to get people to listen. Like, you need to get people in line and working. Like, I don't care where you are, what country you're on, if you're on an archipelago or in a landlocked state in Europe, it doesn't matter. You just do this, right? And I think that in response to a thing that Nevitt, that you brought up, this distinction that you said you kind of, to go all the way back to what I was saying initially, which was the distinction between group, and this is a tentative thing. This is me propose. I want to know if this is right. My sense of the difference between the group interest or actually Joey put it perfectly. Found the quote that was, the problem is situated there between unconscious group desires and pre-conscious, I'm scrolling, pre-conscious class interests, right? And so unconscious group desire and pre-conscious class interest, right? I guess I'm also kind of having, but I'm having trouble, or I have trouble kind of delineating or figuring out the contours of both and how both operate, you know, the difference between the two, because on one hand, I want to say, well, class consciousness and this class interest seems more representational, but it's a pre-conscious interest. Meanwhile, desire is this whole other thing that seems way more representational, although groups are so spontaneous. So here's the flip. I've got this weird reading of it that I don't understand, and I want somebody to try and help me clarify. Groups seem spontaneous and interests seem spontaneous, right? While desires and classes seem more representational, not so spontaneous. So classes and desires, those seem less spontaneous. Groups and interests, those are very spontaneous. But here's the thing. They say group desires and class interests. It's a mix, it's a mishmash. It's a, you know, a 1-2, 2-1, you know what I'm saying? Instead of a 1-1, 2-2. You see, so what's the distinction, I guess? You know, what do you guys think? Do you see my confusion? Does that make sense? This semiotic square I'm trying to paint? I don't know.
So you're saying that desire is spontaneous and desire and groups are spontaneous?
No, I'm saying interest seems spontaneous. To me, I don't even know if this is right. It seems to me like groups and interests are the spontaneous ones. Classes and desires are the ones that are not so spontaneous. They're more representational in the world of forms and abstractions. But they cross the wires. It seems like groups and interests are on one side, classes and desires are on the other. But they say group desires and class interests, which crosses the wires for me. You see what I'm saying? I just feel like I'm confusing some terms here. What do you guys think?
Okay. I think I get what you're saying, although I'm not sure how to kind of like compare that to what they're actually doing, though. Other than
the initial response I'm having is, does it not speak to just maybe the different way that they're approaching desire that maybe seems contra to the psychoanalytic desire that you're coming out of?
Yeah, it's very different. Yeah. I mean, it's actually unconscious, where I mean, psychoanalytic desire is it even unconscious? It doesn't seem like it to me. It seems like they just take like some idea or image in your head, like, oh, there it is, it's unconscious. That's a straw man.
Not that I
But
feel like that
yeah.
answers the question, because I don't know how to describe it, but
Yeah, so I wrote something in the chat there. So I was just, because I was thinking that I don't have a great grasp on that either. I think I know they talk about this more. I know this is a refrain now, in the next section, the fourth section. But here, I think it is that, yeah, that representative quality, that it can become, yeah, distinctly conscious. I think that is kind of the key. And also that it deals with these large molar aggregates. So that's going to be, we didn't get to talk that much about the molecular and the molar, but I think you can kind of, so without getting into too much detail about it, the molar aggregates are just going to be, think about it as just like these big lumps of shit, whatever. You've got your molecular, which is kind of like these flowing, particles all zooming around, quantum stuff going on. And then when they kind of form these statistical kind of lumps that are somewhat predictable enough where you could actually form kind of distinct identities out of that, you can make them like, okay, this is a distinct thing here, like me, I'm a molar identity, like Chase, like, oh shit, it's Chase, like I'll be here next week and be like, oh shit, it's me. Even though molecularly I've got all this stuff going on that's different, it is kind of like that, like an old-fashioned like ship of Theseus kind of thing, sort of. But that's not really like, it's not really so much about identity so much as kind of, really it's about, okay, this thing can be represented, it can have some kind of clear idea, it's kind of gets bound to that, desire does, it gets bound to these things, and that's how it kind of goes from this like unconscious into this pre-conscious interest. So, but desire, I think, it's kind of like the will to power, and that it follows, I see it as kind of, desire will follow wherever there is the most power. So you've got, once again, this kind of like multiplicity of stuff, but you're going to have, it's kind of an intensive field where you're not going to have distinct things. You're just going to have these kind of like zones of indeterminate fluctuations of energy or whatnot. And you can kind of even give them a kind of number and a degree of scale of intensity, like, oh, that's really intense, but there's no kind of distinct unit that you can kind of abstract from that. It's like, oh, there it is, like 1 degree, so I think the way that works, and that it's going to like follow these sort of to use language that Deleuze Guattari would probably use, follow like a vector, like a direction of force, of power. And that's going to be kind of what really determines desire. That's how it can have, that's why it can kind of blow up into a fascist desire. It can become a desire for anything. It doesn't have necessarily a distinct kind of object that it has to be desire of. It's abstract in the sense that it can become desire of anything. And that's what they say, that this is what Freud figured out, and this is what is revolutionary about Freud, is that he figured out that desire was abstract. And the same way, Marx says something similar about Adam Smith, that he discovered kind of production as abstract, that production could be production for production's sake. And I think there's something like that also going on. So I think desire is this kind of, intensive power and a kind of field of multiplicities, and that's a lot of Deleuze Guattarian jargon right there for you. But I think that's the only way to really describe it. At least that's how I am describing it. So, and I'm the explainer guy, so you're stuck with me. So there you go.
We're all unanimously speechless at the outlaying of the theory that you've just presented us with.
For some reason, I'm thinking of fame, like the idea of fame when it comes to desire as like, like why do people want to be famous? Like, really? Yet I think most people do. Maybe it's, I don't know, whatever, but like, is that kind of like a good representation of what you mean by like, there's this power, and then when you like watch a music video or see a famous actor or something like that, it's like this intensity that's kind of part of a bigger power source, being like the state or whatever.
Yeah, so I think it's something, okay, you've got this kind of social field, and I think the way it is that desire kind of has to invest in whatever that social field is. And the social field kind of distributes these where, okay, so the social field, I think you can think of it as these different social formations will have different kind of molar aggregates, kind of large, distinct things. And desire kind of has to, on some level, invest in those things. And so I think, something like our society that is built off of, you get this kind of token of recognition for being famous. But then you think about it, it's kind of like, okay, well, what is the form of being famous that usually is? It's kind of, it's based off of, so I try not to phrase this in a very Hegelian way, but, you want some kind of recognition. And I think that is quite particular to what they will see as that's kind of what is operating in our social formation. And that's built off of these images and kind of identification of these images, which, okay, that sounds Lacanian now, the mirror stage thing. And I
But
think
it can also sound Straussian. I mean, it can also be semiotics and linguistic theory, which seems to be the parallel he's making between the capitalist system. So there's a strong link between what semiotic theory that you ascribe to in capitalism, and if you have like a reductionist type system where there's always a signification or some type of reference theory, it can lead to anti-production, because that money that it represents, that object of the production that it represents, is always going to essentially lead to more desire, because it's almost like he's saying when you stick to a linguistic theory of reductionism, you're going to have the same problems as you would in a capitalist system when you have reductionism with money and what it represents. Like the parallels there seem to be present throughout this entire like chapter, in that it's the flow and the process that needs to be the focus, rather than what it actually references. Is that like, because I keep seeing a lot of Saussurian linguistic theory being paralleled to the capitalist system.
So they see the whole signifier thing, they see that as what is distinct about the despotic imperial social formation, where you've got writing, you've got these kind of laws. How do we interpret that? Well, it comes from the voice, the the logos of the despot. That's going to be your signified, but yet it's always kind of strangely absent. It's always open to interpretation. And but something like just like a pure text of writing of law, that'll be something like a signifier. There'll be, I think I'm getting these backwards possibly. I
But
don't.
that's what I'm saying. Like on 254, he says, not that man is ever the slave of technical machines. He is rather the slave of the social machines. And the social machines are built on language. And when you have a reference theory or a Saussurian type theory where you always have some object that your language relates to, it parallels to money. And that social machine is what's built on it. On 254, he says, not that man is ever the slave of the technical machine, he is rather the slave of the social machine. The bourgeois sets the example. He observes surplus value for ends that are taken as a whole, have nothing to do with his own enjoyment. More utterly enslaved than the lowest of the slaves, he is the first servant of the ravenous machine, the beast of the reproduction of capital, interialization of the infinite debt. And on 255, the thing that stuck out to me was he said, between the servants of the machine, the opposition is between the class and those who are outside of the class, between the servants of the machine and those who sabotage it or its cogs and wheels, which reminded me of Bataille taking surplus value and funneling it back into the political system. The surplus never really allows the system to grow. So there's this strong implication that the language theory that we adopt in relating to one another is tied into socioeconomic slavery.
I think that is accurate about or they'll think of it not as, so language is something too specific for them, because they like to talk a lot of the time about kind of a semiotics that's not linguistic. They think linguistic is kind of too specific. So they'll usually think of it as semiotics, and this is mainly Guattari. He's the one that was really into semiotics, but he really, well, both of them did this, but they really wanted to challenge that signified as the main theory of semiotics that was operating. And so they see it as something archaic, that, and like any kind of like archaic thing, it still operates kind of within capitalism, but almost as a kind of secondary kind of enclave that will appear usually as a function of kind of the reterritorialization aspect. So it's definitely still a factor, but they see capitalism though as a kind of revolution in semiotics that's different from the Saussurian kind of semiotics, in that it can have, oh god, that's the whole first part with the however the fuck you say his name, the Danish guy, Himsveld. So when I read this the second time, for the first time I kind of understood this stuff. Luckily, because they didn't get too in depth about it, unlike in 1,000 Plateaus where it's just absolutely insane. But so one thing that is different, okay, so it's kind of towards the very beginning of the section we are reading in so 240 is the first page, but I think on 241 when they start, oh, and a little after that when they start getting into Lyotard and all of that, where, oh yeah, so the thing is that, okay, so they're saying that with the, okay, yeah, so 242, that's their big page where they have this kind of critique of Saussurian semiotics, and they talk about how it's different. It's not the signifier signified kind of thing anymore, and that, okay, yeah, there's kind of like minimal identities going on in relations of opposition. So okay, so Saussure, the thing is, okay, a word, signifier, this auditory image or sound image or whatever they say it is, that has meaning. Like cat has meaning because it's not bat, because it's not goat, it's not dog. So there's these differential relationships between words, but so this is something that Deleuze talks about even in difference repetition. The problem with that is that there's still these kind of minimal elements, these little identities that are these structural relations that are in opposition to each other. So they get their identities from the fact that they are in opposition, but you can only have opposition from one thing to a next if you have some kind of minimal identity. Therefore, it can't really think difference on a primary level. And that's one of the big critiques they have of this kind of Saussurean way of thinking of things. And so they're saying that, yeah, there's a kind of a privileged reference going on with the overcoding of the despotic signifier, which has to do, I think that's kind of like, okay, you've got some kind of despot, you're going to have some kind of, he's going to be the person that determines kind of like the privileged moment of all these things. What does it mean? You know, it's all going to be kind of hanging on that. And he can kind of say, no, it means this, determine something, overcode it. But the big thing about the capitalist kind of language, so that's the thing. So this kind of decoded language of flows that they're talking about with Himsfeld, or however you say his name, they're saying that, okay, this is the first modern theory of semiotics because it can kind of talk about not only the schizophrenic aspect, but also it can talk about the capitalist aspect of it, about decoding and recoding and all that. So I think it's hard to get a grasp on exactly what is different about it than the signifier thing kind of simultaneously. Although this description they're giving with Marshall McLuhan, I think that helps in the sense that, okay, you've got two flows. So when a flow enters another one, that's kind of your basic unit there. That's what it's all about, is these, that's the point sign or non-signifying signs, point signs, flow breaks or skizzes. So I think this, it really, I didn't do this, but I was thinking the whole time, it'd be really helpful to go back to the first chapter. I think it's the section just called the machines, where they talk about these, the break flows and whatnot. Yeah, the machines, page 36, if anyone cares. But that's where they talk about this, you know, what is a machine? A machine is a system of interruptions or breaks related to a material flow that it cuts into. So you have the kind of plane of immanence that is going on there is going to be, everything is flows, everything is machines, they're the same thing, but they've got distinctions going on there, in that a flow always is going to be kind of, so a machine is nothing but its connections. And what are those connections? They're flows that break into other flows. So that's where that break flow thing comes in there. So, and here they're talking about it in another way of, okay, yeah, what is going on with, so a substance, that's what they call it. Yeah. So a substance for this semiotic, this decoded capitalist semiotic, whatever, a substance is formed when a flow enters into a relationship with another flow, such that the first defines a content and the second an expression. The deterritorialized flows of content and expression are in a state of conjunction or reciprocal precondition that constitutes figures as the ultimate units of both content and expression. So yeah, these figures that are not figurative, which that's kind of one of the main things about Deleuze's book on Francis Bacon and art. So if you've ever seen Francis Bacon paintings, you know, you've got all these kind of like distorted faces and whatnot. As you call it, that's the figure that is not figurative. It's not representational. It has no kind of distinct identity. Instead, it shows a kind of indeterminate zone in between these. And I think that is also what is kind of interesting about these theories of language, or it's not even so much language in a you can only talk about it as language in a very broad sense. They would probably not even want to say that. But this thing where you can have content and expression as this kind of nested relation, which that's what they talk about this McLuhan thing. So, you know, Marshall McLuhan, he's talking about these, okay, the medium, a technological medium, how usually it's the previous medium that really define kind of the sensory ratios. That's what McLuhan talks about in an age, in an era. Say where like print is the kind of primary mode of doing these things. You're going to have a kind of like a medium, which is almost like the background, but then it's going to be filled up with some kind of a content, and that is going to be usually the previous technological medium is going to be the content that's used. So if you think about it, okay, like there's the oral age before that, people are talking like blah blah blah, and then you've got writing that's going to use as its content that kind of speech. Actually, I think that's how they talk about like radio, whatnot. Anyways, whatever. The idea is that they can kind of shift. They're not set, and that's what they like about it, is that you can talk about something without a really. So also another thing kind of operating here is that there's a kind of a polemic against Aristotelian hylomorphism, especially in 1,000 Plateaus. So what is hylomorphism? It's the substance form thing. It's that, you know, you've got material substance that just, that's the thing that just sits there, and it's got its identity, and it's, oh wait, no, that's the material aspect. The form is the thing that stays the same. Wait, what the fuck? I don't even, correct me if I'm wrong. I think I got that mixed up. But anyways, they want to get rid of that kind of dualism of substance form. And they think that the way that Himsel is interesting is because he has this idea of kind of a double articulation. That's why God is a lobster. If you haven't read 1,000 Plateaus, probably a puzzling statement, but very important. So the double articulation has to do with like substance and form. Each substance and each form aspect, each has a content and an expression. So form is a content expression, substance is a content expression. It's just a way to think of it that is where you can think that it can be these determinate things, but also it can shift. And that's what they like about it. It can have a decoding effect, but also it can have this recoding, reterritorialization, stratification. So yeah. Why are people talking about Jordan Peterson? Okay, thank you for obliging my rant there. I don't know if I answered what you're talking about, Joseph, but yeah.
Yeah.
Would the example of the Francis Bacon painting you were talking about be sort of along the lines of like what they're talking about with the body without organs?
Yeah, they say that the figure is the body without organs. Yeah, and I think I said this last week that that Francis Bacon book, I think that gives the clearest explanation of what the body without organs is. Although 1,000 plateaus, so there's a plateau on the body without organs that it's still probably just too complex to be like the clearest explanation of what the body without organs is, but it's probably the best explanation in terms of detail. Yeah, I'll say that. Where, yeah, but so those figures in Francis Bacon, yeah, that's going to be exactly that. The body without organs, where you've got some kind of material body, but it doesn't have any kind of particular organ, any kind of particular function, any kind of particular identity. And I think that's the same thing going on with like what is a decoded flow? You know, it doesn't have any kind of a particular function or any of these things, but it can become that. It can become captured in all these different things. And that's kind of like, that's really like one of the big themes of Deleuze is just like, okay, you've got something like difference or desire or, you know, some kind of free element. But the thing is, how do these things get captured into, you know, whatever it is, like representation, identity, fascism, stratification, you know, or the body without organs versus the organism, you know, schizo desire versus Oedipal desire. So you've got these like continuums, you've got these poles, and that's going to be one of these constant themes in everything. And I think, yeah, trying to like figure out where they are here. They're constantly being, you know, like thrown out there. There's so many things to try to keep in your mind simultaneously that it's difficult. But I think that's why I think almost like a semi like reductive approach to Deleuze or Deleuze and Guattari it's really helpful as long as you don't take it too seriously. Because any kind of way of really stratify, re-territorialize their shit so you can understand it, and then maybe, you know, bring out its living dimensions and all of its revolutionary potential that hopefully it has. Because otherwise, then I've just like devoted like years of my life to what? I don't know. So I feel like I'm getting progress, at least personally. Like I feel like I'll probably have schizophrenia by the end of this book. So I think we're good. We're on the way there. Hopefully everyone else does too.
Yeah, I'm there. I don't understand a thing, dude. I'm
not sure if I understand it, but I like it.
Yeah. Hey, it's the process, right? It's less about the ideological conceptualization here, right? I have to go. I got to go pick up Atticus from a football game. So I appreciate everyone's conversation. Take care.
Go with Jesus.
Oh, yeah. Student loan forgiveness. I do like your background. I love that there's Jesus up there and then Arthur behind. Right there.
Originally, I mean, the whole picture is the Sacred Heart of Jesus. So it shows him holding his heart out, which is really bizarre, but I couldn't get that on a screen.
Yeah, the first century has him saying Kamehameha or something. Oh, wait, what did the Temple of Doom people say? Kamehameha is Dragon Ball Z. Remember that when he reached in and grabbed the heart? What did he say? There was something I can't remember.
I don't know. In the Last Temptation of Christ, William Defoe as Christ actually reaches into his chest and rips his heart out and holds it out to his disciples, which I thought was fabulous.
Yeah, that's a great one. I just remember being really freaked out as a kid by that Temple of Doom one. So I'll probably just message you on Discord when I remember randomly driving down the road what he says. But anyway, so
see you, Joseph.
Bye. Well, I'm not driving. I'm technically walking, just FYI. So
yeah, you have sucked up some
not driving anywhere, walking. It's right down the road. So all good. Bye.
Nevitt, who's the painter of that?
You know, I don't know. I was wondering that myself. I imagine it's some famous romantic, but I'm not sure. I just did an image search on Google and picked one.
I find Jesus's mustache rather disturbing. That is,
You know, if you wanted to make a case for Jesus as being bi or transsexual, that kind of painting would do it.
yeah, he's supposed to be kind of ambiguous, or not. What's the word for it?
Androgynous.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I don't think fundamentalists would like that, but yeah, I mean, he's pretty androgynous there.
I remember reading something about that had an interesting take on why that was, that Jesus was usually depicted like that, but I can't remember. So
Eric, that's the painter, Pompeo Batoni.
Yeah, according to my quick Google searching there.
sounds Italian.
Sounds Italian.
I had a question about decoding. I've been like thinking about that concept throughout the week, and one example would be like, well, I'm not saying this is an example, I'm asking, but like going from like medieval Christianity into like the Enlightenment, right? It's like this development of the scientific method. Would that be like an example of like coding or decoding? And I actually have a second part too. If like you're listening to music, right? And like it sounds amazing and you're feeling it. But then you decide one day that you want to learn it, right? So it's like, okay, you have to go through this process of like looking at the music and, you know, whether you're listening to it to like, you know, having to write it out. Let's just say that because it'll make my explanation a little easier. So you're listening to it by ear and transcribing it. And would that be like an example of coding, or would like is this like, because I feel like it could either be coding or decoding, because I think of like decoding as like cracking a code, right? Like, oh, okay, there's this code that exists and it's doing this thing, which is how it makes you feel or whatever the affect of the music is. But then like that's totally not what you're doing when you're transcribing music, right? It's a totally different process, but it's with the same music. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So in 1,000 Plateaus, I think they actually they talk actually quite a bit about music in there, and they talk about, you know, transcribed music and music scores and all this stuff. And a lot of stuff that I don't understand. You know, I know like a little smidgen of music, like basic music theory stuff. I can kind of read music. Well, I mean, it's like the, you know, the normal scale or whatever. But so the code though, I think it's too specific in how it's used here in Anti-Oedipus, that I'm not sure they would want to call it that. But in 1,000 Plateaus, they kind of add in their, you know, their lovely terminology and jargon and whatnot. But I think there's probably helpful words that they use to describe that better, as a kind of, so I think they would see something like that, like a kind of formal, like kind of positioning, like coordinates, you know, of something like music. They would see that as something, they'd probably call it, I think, a function probably. And they would say that it's kind of something kind of like slows down, like let's call it like a flow or an intensity of sound, in order to give a kind of, you know, a certain structure or function to it. And but I don't think they would call that, I think it's one of these cases where it's kind of it doesn't correspond exactly to coding or decoding, although, I think when you talk about like, okay, this would relate to the other part about, modern science and whatnot, where the thing is that still those say these kind of functions or putting things into structures, or even that those can be still kind of like decoding. So because after all, what is the decoding of capitalism? It's to put everything into quantities, into monetary equivalences and whatnot, which in a way is that's pretty rigid, but it's decoded because it doesn't operate in this kind of like qualitative selective way. It's not taking this one thing of whatever, women, men, women go here, men go there. That is something like a code, and that decoding would be like, okay, fuck that distinction. Instead, we're going to do it based off your income level, a quantity, and we're going to have, like a mathematical formalism that kind of goes along with that. So I think, yeah, something like a music theory, they would actually probably see as a kind of decoding, probably when it's like first, especially when it's kind of like first coming about, that it'll probably perform like a kind of decoding of music. But at the same time, then it becomes a kind of stratification of, what they call the plane of composition. That's going to be what art is all about. So music is going to be has its own kind of field of immanence and composition and whatnot. So there's painting, and so yeah, I think that's how I think of that. And then modern science, I think that you definitely have to see that as a kind of decoding and deterritorialization. That is, and I don't think that is, you can consider that totally distinct from capitalism, where they're happening around the same time, which I don't think that's just a coincidence that you've got kind of industrial capital and all this stuff, and at the same time you've also got the Catholic Church doesn't quite have as much power. I think the way that, so I think of modern science, I think of, this kind of like Descartes is kind of like the person who's really on the cusp of modernity, and this really kind of like the last kind of like, there's still a lot of archaisms that are preserved even in Descartes, or I think especially in Descartes, from whether it's in philosophy like the scholasticism, or just all the Catholic stuff that's still in his ideas, how he still preserves those, but that he's really the person that's kind of like bringing in modernity, at least modern philosophy, I'd say, in modern science. And that he's kind of reacting, I think, in a lot of ways to kind of this radical change in his society. And that's also what kind of spurs on his own ideas that kind of further that same direction. And I definitely would think that is a kind of decoding, because it's, I think even the way, this is probably not accurate, but okay, the way that even you would have something like, so a code for, scholasticism would be something like, you've got this subject over here. I'm just going to not say anything specific because I'll probably be wrong. You got some subject over here, some subject over there. You've got Aristotle, you've got Aquinas. There you go. That's kind of like a code there showing this is how it goes. This is how knowledge is to be distributed, and just flows from there. But aside from obvious leaks and whatnot, the way that they're going to have to, whether it's Descartes or Spinoza or Leibniz or whoever, they're going to have to perform some kind of decoding for that. Yeah, so that's my take on that.
I'm imagining like an example of like the kind of experience music might create for someone. And then to decode music would be like, look, we don't have to use music to create an experience for someone. It can be used for anything. And then it's like, well, let's use it to make money. And it's like the reterritorialization. It's like, what better thing can we use it for? Why not just make money?
Yeah, so they talk about deterritorialization of music in A Thousand Plateaus, and how so one thing they are interested in is kind of moving away from that the rigid kind of Western music model, the scale. I forget the terminology enough to sound somewhat like I know what I'm talking about with that, but you've got this kind of, stratified Western system of music. They talk about a deterritorialization away from that involves a kind of like new chromaticism, where, the chromatic, it's kind of like notes are all together or in a succession or a continuity line, something like that. But that's kind of like breaking it up into these new frequencies and like new intervals, like in between the Western scale, where you've got specific kind of harmonies that go, and you've even got Plato who's like, we need only these harmonies, and these notes will work for our guardians, because we don't want their bodily appetites getting, stimulated, as then they'll be thinking of things other than, pure forms of justice and Platonic bullshit. So yeah, yeah, I think A Thousand Plateaus would definitely be the place to look at that, because they say a lot about music. Actually, where is it? Oh, here it is. Oh, I've got this, so you can't see it. So this is a book on, oh yeah, good, you got A Thousand Plateaus. So this is by Ronald, I'll just like write it down in the chat, but it's called Deleuze on Music, Painting, and the Arts, and it's very helpful. Although I haven't read much of the part specifically on music, but the author, Ronald, I think his name is like Bogue, Bogue. He's a really good commentator on Deleuze's work, so I recommend him. And probably this too. So if you really want to learn kind of like Deleuze on music, I would probably, Thousand Plateaus alongside this book, I think would be quite helpful. I got it from, yeah. It was pretty cheap too. Although, well, actually I have a PDF of it also, but print books are nice too. Okay, that's the title. Wow, everyone left. Wait, where did Hunter go?
I forgot what he said. He's probably got to get stoned and play computer games, is my guess.
I like
Bastard.
knowing Hunter, he probably had like a party that had to
Yeah.
jump to. I feel like he holds off getting stoned and playing computer games for us. But I feel like he ditches us pretty quick for
For a party.
perhaps rightly so. When you mentioned the science, and they make a note, page is this, like maybe 241. when they're talking about technical language machines and production narrowly determined by information, I don't think I was getting anything out of that from reading it, but just that word like information. And I was listening to that. I sent one of the podcasts in the group, and Chase, you always reference them, but Acid Horizons, and they were talking about the apparatus of capture chapter in 1,000 Plateaus, which, yeah, I haven't read that chapter in 1,000 Plateaus, but just listening to him talk about it because you referenced it, Chase, and yeah, they sure enough, like they bring up so many themes from this section of Anti-Oedipus, and they're even talking about Anti-Oedipus in that podcast, but they reference this idea of, and it was kind of like a little bit beyond me. I'm like trying to like make connections to it along these lines of, like, I appreciated what they were saying in previous sections about like kind of pairing this like technical machines, which again, I don't really know like how to talk about that or how they're meaning it, but it reminds me of, Chase, you and I did that, or you did the whole thing. I never got to Deleuze part, but the Heidegger and Deleuze on technology course. And just like I was seeing that shine through here on this idea of like techne, or how we think of technology as like extracting from XYZ. And I saw that like it felt like they were kind of pairing that with the scientific attitude of just like how science itself is this process too of like extracting and then like feeding back into our ability to be a productive worker. And they referenced this in the Acid Horizons episode too, where they talked about, yeah, you know, all these like tools we have, scientific technology just being created to like make us more productive, and all these like gadgets we have of kind of plugging ourselves into just becoming like stats and information. And like something interesting they talked about, they referenced was just like, it's not about like you becoming someone that they know completely because they've tracked all of your moves, all of your information. But they mentioned how it's like the information that your devices track, it's not about you. It's about creating these like giant aggregates of information, and then how those aggregates of information are used to produce technology that just kind of like influences people like on a large scale. And I just thought that was kind of like, it's just interesting. I feel like there were some holes in my understanding of it, but it was interesting how they were saying like, you know, it's not about like some singular individual, but it's like, it's not even about you, but it felt like what they were saying was the information on your health and well-being and your purchases and your lack of vacation or the dates you tend to take vacation, like those are being almost like decoded from your particular person and then plugged into these aggregates of information to create like new gestalts. I guess codes would be the right thing. And I'm wondering like how axiomatization plugs into that. Yeah, that was just like some interesting stuff that was coming up for me when I was listening to that podcast. And then another thing I remember, like I've been listening to a lot of this podcast. It's all about kind of like neuroscience, but it's pretty much just like how you can optimize your body and your mind for basically like how can you perform better, be productive. And you know, I like listened to somebody who had a different take, who was being interviewed on that podcast, and he even referenced one of the earlier episodes. He's like, you talk about gratitude like it's like a tool to kind of like manipulate your mind and make you more happy so that you can produce better. And I remember him saying that and being like, yeah. And it's like I find myself doing that in my role a bunch too, of like, yeah, hey everybody, let's talk about gratitude. But I'm not talking about gratitude to like, you know, be. And it's interesting, like just the conversation of like woo-woo-ness, or even like the idea of Western neuroscience, science kind of researching like breathing practices from yogic traditions, and then turning them into just like how you calm your heart rate, how you like manipulate your emotions, as opposed to, again, these ideas of, I'm imagining like the savage territory of like a ritual that's meant to like, you know, create meaning for people, as opposed to just like manipulate your body in a certain fashion so that you can perform better, interact better. Yeah, it's kind of fascinating. And I in the Acid Horizons episodes, they just kind of like referenced all this science stuff, and I guess it speaks to just that again, that double movement of how, yeah, science just being one of those like things that we all kind of like jump behind because it has all these capacities to kind of free me. But what does it like free me up to do? I don't know. What else do? What am I do with my freedom? But turn back and box it up and sell it to someone.
Or you go schizo. Yeah. So I think the thing about science and technology in particular that reminded me of something. I don't know if we talked about this last week, but it was the first section on capitalism where they're talking about Gregory Bateson, and so he's kind of he's the person actually had this idea of the plateau, that's what they use in 1,000 Plateaus, but they talk about this kind of movement where he's following these lines of deterritorialization, like going out there, like where's the edge, where's the outside, where does thought like encounter the outside, how do I find this? And so he starts out, he's studying ethnography, and he's going to these tribal cultures, trying to find some kind of outside. He goes there, and then that leads to schizophrenia. So he's studying schizophrenia, like, okay, that's the outside. And then, okay, no, that leads to dolphins and dolphin language, the dolphin flow. Where does the dolphin flow go to then? How far out can you get? Well, it ends up just going back to the research done by the US Army. That's where they're talking about, like, yeah, these things, they get captured. I think one of the things, like, really the sense I get from this is kind of capitalism is that it is quite the beast. It is not. There's not really like an optimistic tone.
Yeah, no,
in
not at all.
this at all.
The dolphin thing is great because I feel like the dolphin thing is just the prime example. Like I imagine capitalism just being like, try me. Like what can you create? Like just try. you
Yeah.
Dolphins, cool. Put them in the army.
Yeah, the dolphin flow. Oh, yeah. And then but yeah, I think
pessimistic. And I'm remembering, I'm recalling when we started reading Bataille, I was kind of reflecting on that same stuff. Just on like, it feels like everything that was once or is important to me, meaningful to me, that it feels like it doesn't fit in the box. Like there comes a time in my life when it's just like, oh shit, hey, look what I can do with this.
Yeah.
In regards to like my image or my professional image or
when I was reading the Eugene Holland, his kind of guidebook for this, so he stresses anti-production a lot. And what he said about the anti-production that is particular to capitalism, I think was really interesting. The way that, okay, before anti-production was you have a surplus of something, you expend it in this glorious expenditure, but that is the point. That's the end. That's the purpose for all these things. And that's also what kind of how society is organized too, is for the greater expenditure. So you've got the Aztec temples of the sacrifices, which it's glorious, but instead now it's the anti-production itself becomes consumption, consumerism. It just becomes something of that needs to be just funneled back into the circuit of production to begin with. So all of our anti-production is just another way to fit into production.
I'm
this
reminded
cycle
of what Hunter said about like dying slowly, right? It's just like I'm trying to do it slowly. I don't want to do it all at once. And it's like there's no like hoorah. Yeah, I made the joke about edging, but it's like it's genuinely kind of how it feels. It's just like this.
Yeah, Yeah.
It's very slow. I'm not gonna get the hoorah. I'm just gonna keep slowly producing.
Could you explain what they mean by anti-production?
Yeah, so I think what's going on there is, so I think the way that, at least in capitalism, the way that's going to work, and I think so it's mainly something from Marx, probably more than anyone, who kind of first really formulated this. And the idea is, okay, yeah, Bataille was one who kind of like took Marx and then added in this kind of Nietzschean element. And then obviously that's kind of what Deleuze and Guattari are following in that same direction of Bataille, of kind of a Marx-Nietzsche, I don't want to say synthesis because they would probably disagree with that, but fuck it, whatever, synthesis. Nietzsche-Marx synthesis, I said it. Yeah. By the way, before I forget, there's a really interesting part where they're using Nietzsche's idea of, like slave morality and whatnot, as by talking about the bourgeoisie, that, we're all slaves. Like the first servants are the bourgeoisie. I thought that was really interesting. But anyways, but no, okay, so for anti-production, that's gonna be something, if you have too much of a surplus, you got too much shit. So this is also, oh yeah, so you just joined us for Anti-Oedipus. You didn't read Bataille, this. Forget it. Yeah, just that's what. So we read Bataille, Accursed Share, before this, and he talks about this a lot. The idea is you have some kind of a surplus, and you've got to get rid of it somehow, some way. And the question is, how do we do that? But the thing is, for capitalism, what is kind of crucial is that you can't produce too much. So you'll have to kind of get rid of stuff, either create kind of like a, artificially kind of manipulate the market, so like, oh, we don't have any oil or whatever the hell it is, because if you have too much of something, it's too cheap, or you don't have people wanting to buy something. So what do? You have to increase like consumer demand for something. So that consumption element, where instead of producing something, you're realizing the production of it by buying it. And that's really what is needed to complete, the whole circuit of capitalism is, if they just produce stuff, put it into, consumer capital, into commodities, but then nobody bought it, then that would not work. So that anti-production, at least for capitalism, is going to be in that consumer consumption aspect, which is crucial, because, so one thing is an example, there's I think this is like a deflationary thing that occurs. I think I got that right. Where if you have too much stuff, but not enough demand for it, you'll create another crisis, which, although the idea is that you will constantly have these crises in capitalism because of the very structure of it. One thing is that the way that the money is formulated, which I think is interesting, that they talk about this somewhat, but the fact that, okay, so banks, they will kind of loan themselves money on interest to create money out of nothing. And that's kind of what money is. It's just debt. It's a promissory note to a central bank that like makes it up. And then it's just interest charged back. But to who? To itself, this bank. So that's why it's this debt. But the thing is, okay, what they do with that is they will loan out more money than they actually have. And that's why you have run on banks and things like that, where if we all started, demanded, go to our bank and say, I want to, withdraw all my money, it would crash the bank. It'd be a run on the bank, and that's what causes, that's one form of the crisis. But then there's other forms where if you just simply don't have enough demand, not enough, that will cause this kind of too much production. So the anti-production element, fractional reserve, that's it.
I'm like,
Um,
and I'm wondering how does this kind of make sense plugged into that idea of like creating internal limits, relative limits. And they talk about that, how that kind of plugs into this idea of like, we can't produce too much. We have to create these internal limits.
Yeah, I think so. Is so the internal limit is going to be, or I think the big thing about capitalism is that it has to be able to kind of, what is imminent about it is that it's these axioms, but also a mode of production and whatnot, but that it has to be able to reproduce itself. And it only kind of becomes concrete, as they say in a very kind of Hegelian language way, by just kind of instantiating something that will lead towards its own recreation, its own reproduction, and put it into a circuit. So I think anytime you've got like one sort of, flow of that circuit and it doesn't circle back, that's going to be something that's going to be like the external limit. So that internal limit is going to be however you kind of recoup that, what would be the deterritorialization aspect, the kind of like going out aspect to the periphery. If you're not able to kind of rein that in to something that keeps the reproduction of the whole system going, then that's going to be external limit. Reining in, that's kind of taking that external limit, but internalizing it. But also it's kind of, I think the best way to think of that is the way that, reappropriation and recuperation works in capitalism, where this is just, anything that would have been an external limit outside of capitalism before, say, just like whatever, communism in like the 50s or whatever, it was probably like, maybe that was a threat, maybe not, probably not, to capital, let's just say it is. So it has to be kind of either, I think, totally kind of expelled in a way, either on one level, or it has to be internalized in some way, which I think really it was always kind of like that with the fact that we're dealing with nation states in a kind of global market anyways, where you had even these.
I'm trying to like plug it into just individual experience, which maybe that's what they're kind of discouraging, this whole de-psychologizing. But I'm thinking of like the critique of like self-help, like where, it's like if you almost become like addicted to self-help to this extent of like, I don't want to get better, because if I get better, then what book I'm going to read next.
Yeah, that's kind of how they talk about psychoanalysis, right? That, or even Oedipus, how it is that double bind where, the cure is just a continuation of the same thing. And I think, and I think the fact that, okay, we don't really do psychoanalysis anymore, but we still do all this stuff like therapy and whatnot, and all this is kind of, it's pretty similar. It's almost like the psychologizing of an axiom, but it's with yourself of, okay, say I'm like, oh, I'm in graduate school, I'm so stressed out, writing my thesis, and then my friend would be like, oh yeah, you're stressed out, you should see like a therapist or something. They're like, okay, in a way, okay, thanks, friend, looking out for me. That's nice and everything. But you think about it, it's kind of like a way of having me just like keep going in the system so I can keep adding my own surplus value to it. And it's like if I go crazy and it's just like, okay, maybe they'll still get some surplus value out of that, whatever. Like the state will pay for me in the asylum or whatever. But or is that a good thing? Like if people just like go like just totally insane, just like confined. Does that contribute like again? Is that against capitalism? I don't, probably not.
Well, Deleuze, I mean, he says something. What was it in this chapter? I think where he's just like, there's one class, and there's people in the class, and there's people outside the class. And what was he saying? Like, there's the schism,
Yeah,
and he like
yeah.
kind of linked him with just like the rejects or the outlaws. I mean, and
Yeah,
Chase, you
that's
mentioned this earlier, of like the pessimistic tone, and yeah, I'm like, I wonder, like, what would they intend for one to like feel and do at this point? When you say just like that, it almost feels like hopeless. And I guess I get that sense from Bataille too.
yeah. So I know that definitely I'll repeat this once again, but the fourth section I think has more of their kind of, I mean, one of the sections is literally called like the positive task of schizoanalysis. So I don't think necessarily they're meaning like happy positive, like optimistic positive, but probably overlap, hopefully.
Direction.
Yeah. I think that's definitely, that self-help thing is definitely, and like Zizek like talks about this, how that like self-help or Buddhism or mindfulness stuff, it's just another kind of like axiom, but for individuals. And even kind of like, I think even like the whole idea that like it's all about happiness, like happy, that's the goal of everything. That itself is just, what does happy even mean? It's like to be well adjusted to a state in which you're like having your surplus value extracted from you. So I think people should be alienated. They should not feel like good. I mean, I don't think it needs to be like some aesthetic thing where no, you should feel bad. I totally disagree with that too. It's kind of bad conscience or whatever. But the notion of happiness that I think is sold as like what we should aim for, well, it's usually delayed. And I think that's one of the things, that's kind of that anti-production thing. It's kind of how it's particular in capitalism. It used to not be delayed so much in these previous social formations, because whatever, every full moon, you've got your ritual orgy where there's your expenditure there. Now instead it's kind of, oh, you graduated 10th grade, wait till you graduate 11th grade, you graduate. It's always this delayed thing going on. Graduate, you get your job. Eventually it's kind of like, okay, after retirement, you'll get your expenditure then.
Just wait until you get to 1,000 plateaus.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that's
even the asking of the question is interesting though, right? It's just like, what am I supposed to do with this decoded flow of my existence? Please, somebody re-territorialize me, daddy.
So I am, okay, this weekend, I need to write something for my friend's zine. And what I'm going to write, has anyone heard of Randonautica? Randonautica, yeah. So I'm going to write something about Randonautica, and I'm going to make the case that it has kind of potential positive vectors of deterritorialization. So for those who don't know, because I think I just saw Joey say yes, that he had heard of it. So it's this app that it'll give you these random locations around wherever you are. And the idea is you go and like explore these locations that are given to you. So you end up exploring places you would not explore otherwise. But the thing is, when I really started using this, at first I was thinking like, oh, this is a great example of, this is the fucking rhizome. This is all, yeah, fuck yeah, schizo. And then like using it, I sort of was like, oh my God, this is like, you have to like, there's like coins involved where you only get so much and you have to like pay for them. And actually, when I first started using it a few years ago, it didn't have this. So I'm going to make the case. Oh, and there's a giant terms and conditions list, like huge, massive. I tried to read it and I had to like give up. It was just like so I read it for something like well over an hour, and I was like halfway done with it. And I was just like, oh my God, this is insane.
Basically, you're right. Correct me if I'm wrong. It just gives you coordinates, and you just go out and explore. And it just gives you random coordinates, and like people just find random shit. And
Yeah,
sometimes
so
people
you're
have found
supposed to
like
have
bodies though. People have found like
Yeah,
all
yeah.
this, like scary like synchronicity type. Oh, I'm gonna find what I need for my spiritual development. And like again, some people will just find like just randomly come across scary stuff. Or haunting.
Yeah, so okay. So I've been doing a little bit of research into this. It's kind of okay. So yeah, it became famous and it became like a big TikTok thing because of dead bodies. And also, if you know anything about TikTok, there's a kind of an economy of like scary stuff on there that really, I think someone should do like a Baudrillardian analysis of TikTok in this sense, where so these people will create these fake paranormal videos in order to get views because it's monetized, and also because it's like, where's surplus value of enjoyment? It's in kind of like having your quantities go up. That's kind of our axiom that we all understand. Facebook is about like get your likes, have a quantity of likes. TikTok followers, Instagram followers, or whatever it is. So that incentivizes these absurd videos that very credulous people will watch. And people did this with fucking Randonautica, where they're saying that, well, some stuff was like conspiracy theory shit, where they're saying that it was actually run by serial killers and that the locations would like pop up to like serial killer like black sites, and people would go there and just like get tortured or whatever. Or people would follow you, or like there's like satanic conspiracy. It was like a QAnon almost stuff. But now the thing is with TikTok, it's all kind of conditioned on these hashtags of being scary, and that's what it's all about. And but the thing is, there's another aspect to it that if you really look at the stuff that people post, so I was looking at the Reddit, and it's actually, I think, more, if you don't look at like the hot like searches on Reddit or the top ones, because the top one is just like found a dead body, of course. I mean, that's an interesting story, of course, but the thing is that if you look at just the random ones, all of them are quite disappointing. You just go to a place, there's just fucking grass there, like wow, but the thing is that the idea is you're supposed to have some kind of intention when you go there. So it used to be you write it into the app, you just like type it like death, like that's the thing, like people do like write like, oh, my intention is death, like let's see if I can find death here, which I think it's kind of interesting. It's like the death instinct or whatnot, but then but really a lot of people, they don't do it for that, and they will use it for like this kind of like quasi new agey kind of thing, where they'll like their intention is, that's the idea, is that it's kind of like, what the bleep do we know, like quantum physics, like consciousness collapses the wave function thing, where my intention, yes, that's definitely true. yeah, I'm totally possessed by demons. I've, yes, you do. Oh yeah, look at my shirt. Yeah, Hegel is the devil. So TikTok, fun stuff, not really, but Randonautica, good example of simultaneous deterritorialization or reterritorialization, just like demons too. Demons have a good aspect of deterritorializing, but you gotta be careful. You gotta be careful. That's all I'll say. 909. Capitalism.
Capitalism sucks. I think
I want that to be like my ringtone or something. I think I'm gonna try. Okay, I'm probably way too lazy to do this, but I just got this idea of I'm going to go back and edit this and just get that one clip of Nevitt saying capitalism sucks and just do something with that. Yeah.
Yeah, get me fired.
Can you get fired for just saying capitalism sucks? That
Hanks
would prove that it does suck. So
we get fired is the one who points it out. You get fired for that.
Hanks wouldn't fire me,
Yeah.
but someone in the state legislature would. So
it's true. Yeah. Well, if you got to be careful with critical race theory, because can't do that here, you know. Which, I mean, what does that even mean? Like, what if I teach about like
that's what it means.
there was no
What?
slavery. There was just what?
Misunderstanding.
Yeah, an alternative to black employment.
Yeah, so I think it was like I think my mom was telling me about this, that people were trying to say that, well, only like a small percentage of the slaves went to North America, so America's actually like different. Like we're okay, you know. Down in like South America, yeah, that was bad, but America only got like 5% of like the total slave trade, which was by far like the worst slave. Like slavery's been going on for a long time, but yeah, the like African like slave trade across the Atlantic, that was basically like the worst one in history. That was, and America was involved. Yeah.
You know, I made this terrible mistake when I was testing out. So I used Packback, which is this online discussion forum in my classes.
Yeah, I remember that.
And I made this terrible mistake when I was testing out some new features this summer. I added myself as a student so I could respond to my own post, you know, to test out some of these features. And I wrote some really ridiculous posts, you know, in the process of testing them out. And one of my ridiculous posts was, America, go America.
Oh God.
We are the big winners. We are great. Everyone else sucks. And I forgot to delete it before class started. And so some student responded recently. It's like, yeah, you're right. You've got it.
Oh my God. Oh, no.
I went back and deleted that. It's like, oops.
I would just like you should just like given the student like an F or something. Like no, incorrect. That's a bad argument.